Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. And of course, whether you're watching live or on catch up on our YouTube channel, welcome to today's FIP webinar, which we're delighted to bring to you in partnership with our friends at Mather Economics. Now, today we're going to be discussing one of the key aspects of the strategy that dominates our industry's strategic thinking, which is digital subscription. News media businesses everywhere have made the shift to paid content, and magazine media businesses everywhere are poised on the edge of the pool, ready to dive into this new revenue stream. One of the key get rights in your digital subscription strategy is pricing, and I'm delighted to be joined today by two experts who are going to explore this important topic. But before I introduce my guests, some housekeeping. We will have the opportunity for questions later, so if you would like to ask our panel something, please do so using the Q&A button, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, and I will ask your questions at the end of the day's session, unless, of course, they're entirely relevant to what we're talking about at that moment, in which case I will ask the panel as we go along. Do also keep an eye on the chat box, which you can access using the button at the bottom of the screen. We will be posting some useful links in there throughout the session, and if you want to watch the session again, be able to do so on our YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for FIP World. Next week, we'll also be launching a joint report with Mather Economics covering some of the topics that we're discussing today. So to make sure that you don't miss out on this and all the other great content and events that we do, you can sign up for our newsletter, and the link to do that is in the chat. So it's now time for me to introduce my guest. Joining me first is Luke McGurko, who is Head of Data Science and Operational Team at Mather Economics, and he's going to be discussing this with Laurie Truitt, VP Global Consumer Growth at Time. Welcome to you both.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So let's start with you, Laurie, and just ask about your work with Mather. How have you worked with Mather in the past, and how is Mather working with Time?
Great. I've worked with Mather for a number of years. In my previous role as the Vice President of Digital Consumer Marketing at Gannett is when I first started to work closely with Mather, in the same capacity actually as we are at Time. We brought them in to kind of help us do analysis and build some models to support our digital growth and our digital revenue growth. And we are doing that at Time as well. So we actually have Mather at Time working on multiple models, not only on the digital side, but also on the print side of the business as well. And that includes our Expire business, our Winbacks, our renewals, and our digital subscription business supporting that. So that is how we are working together. We have a couple things going at the same time, and we're utilizing the models and strategy and engagement to kind of bring all of that in order to meet our revenue goals.
Oh, that's interesting that you're working with them across both print and digital. Maybe we can explore that a little bit later on, and people I know will want to ask questions about that, because we always get questions about print when we do these sessions as well. Let's move on to you, Luke. Luke, please just explain a little bit about what you do at Mather Economics and what your role entails.
Happily. And if it's all right with you, I'll start sharing my screen at the same time. So I am head of data science and ML ops at Mather Economics. Currently, Mather is a business consultancy specializing in applied analytics, pricing, yield management. And the newest one is data science as a service. We work closely with companies like Time to actually integrate our data science and our data engineering team into existing organizations so that we can access information and then build models within the individual infrastructure of the organization so that the models can be deployed and become essentially automated in their system, so that we build the models, we analyze, and then ultimately it becomes part of their infrastructure. As you can see on the screen, we have 20 years of experience with over 50 economists in the building, and essentially our reach is worldwide. We currently build pricing and analytics models for companies mostly in the media space from around the world.
So, Luke, I mean, it's inevitable that we would end up talking in a session like this, as we do in every session at the moment, about inflation. Inflation really has become a worldwide challenge. What's been your recommendation on pricing, bearing in mind where we are with inflation?
It's the topic that comes up either first, second, or third, and I'll defer to Laurie on this as well. Regarding pricing right now, the question is, are media products actually something that should have a price increase? Because as you think about what's happening in inflation right now, this is the inflation rate in both the United States and Europe. You can see that starting at the end of 2020, inflation is essentially a straight line going up. And while we see a little bit of a decline in the United States at the last couple months here, it's still going up in Europe. So what we have been counseling our clients on is actually how inflation looks essentially in our product lines right now. So what you're looking at on this chart, James, is essentially the concept of what happens when you see inflation in the broader society. So as inflation rises, you would assume, and it's true, that subscribers tend to reduce their subscriptions at a higher rate, except one of the things that we're seeing, and this data comes across a few hundred of our different clients from around the world, what you're noticing on this line is our expectation is this green line that churn is going to continue to go up. But what we're finding is elasticity, this darker line, price is having no adverse effect on churn. So if I were to say this to you a different way, consumers are actively reducing the amount of subscriptions, but what we're finding is it's not based on price. The reason why that's important then is you can still have a very solid relationship with your customer while simultaneously increasing their lifetime value without having much concern on the effect it's going to have on the overall churn rate. So this is a little contradictory to what you would think, but we're encouraged by the fact that we're seeing these results.
That's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, you would think that the green line would be the thing that would happen in the market based on our understanding of collective consumer psychology. Do you think there's a sense that people are, rather than just being price sensitive, they're just being volume sensitive? In other words, they're looking at the number of subscriptions they've got and just picking one to get rid of?
Lori, do you?
Yeah, I could definitely speak to that. Yeah, I definitely think that's the driver. I believe, like, from years ago to now, I don't actually think your competition is your competition anymore. Your competition out there is really the 17 other household subscriptions that are sitting within a person for a home, excuse me. So you really have to compete against those. Like, so what are the clothing subscriptions, the food subscriptions, the television subscriptions, and then the news subscriptions? And you really need to be a priority in those people's lives. And how do you do that? You have to do that through engagement, value prop, and really hoping that you hit that moment with them where they actually see you as a valuable asset to their monthly subscription pool. And that's really where it is. And then I do think when it comes to price, that yes, price is not as much of a factor. It's always been a factor though when you do a price increase on anyone. So you just need to be ready to kind of battle that. So have really strong engagement programs, really strong win-back programs, and really be ready to catch that person before the actual churn happens, which I think alleviates that number and makes it not as strong.
So it's interesting to think that your competition might not be other news media products. It might be Starbucks, or it might be Microsoft Office, or something else that people are paying for on a recurring basis. So, I mean, Luke, bearing in mind that graph, is the recommendation then that you continue with price increases during inflation?
Yes, and I'll defer to Lori on her strategy with time on what we're working on with her, as that's the next part. But yes, it's a scenario where customer lifetime value is still probably the most important component of your relationship with the consumer. And as you provide them good quality products, yes, they're still considering media to be a value. And that's what essentially this chart is showing, and how we're approaching this with most of our clients, most notably with time.
Right.
And Lori, what's your approach to that?
Yeah, I definitely couldn't agree more. I think there's definitely ways of looking at your subscribers and knowing who to give a price increase to and who not to, and really trying to, it's a balancing act is how I like to look at it. Is like, what percent can you keep at the same price and help with that churn number, and what percent can you actually increase and dive into a little bit more? I think the unique thing in the magazine industry is that for most magazines, pricing is already very low, which is me coming out of the newspaper industry. I spent a lot of time at the New York Times, time at Gannett, and now moving into the magazine side of the business. And I think you really need to look at exactly who's giving that price, who you're giving that price increase to, but also look at your price point in general. I think in the magazine world, prices are very low still. Whereas in the newspaper side of the business, they are much higher. So I do think there's more room, at least in the magazine side of the business, but I do think there's a smart way of pushing your increases based on who your customer is, what the model looks like, not giving a one-size-fits-all approach to everybody, and really trying to balance the act of who do you stay on, keep on that price, and who do you increase, and overall looking at the engagement levels of those users, tenure, how often are they coming to the site, and really building out what I like to call like an RV model. So recency, volume, frequency, and understanding the behaviors. And then really looking at and keeping those behaviors strong by putting tactics against them to keep them where they need to stay. If they're like a medium engaged user or a high engaged user, and really play that into your price increases.
Laurie, I just want to pick up on something you said there, because it's interesting. You talk about coming from, sorry, my camera keeps going off, I don't know why. Coming from an outsider's perspective and looking at the magazine industry for the first time and thinking that prices are too low. I mean, this is something, particularly in the print world, that's on everybody's mind at the moment, given the massive increases in paper prices that we've seen. Do you feel that there's still room for magazine print prices to grow further, never mind the digital side?
I do. I definitely think there's price, which we are doing with Mather on our side. We are increasing our print prices. We are looking at tenure. We are looking at engagement even of our print subscribers, especially in the magazine world. And I used to look at this in the newspaper world, but like a Sunday only subscriber and then a magazine subscriber, you really need to make them a digital subscriber as well. Like, what are they reading? Like in the newspaper side of the business, they get the paper on Sunday. Then what are they reading Monday through Saturday? So to me, that's like really a digital subscriber with the benefit of print. And like, how do you actually make your product more digital first, where it's supporting what you're delivering in the home to what they're doing online, and really getting them, logged in, engaged. We do a lot of marketing newsletters, which actually perform really, really, really well against our regular newsletters, and they're more personalized approach. They have a more inviting feel when they open them. And the goal of that is to really like look at I call them a zombie. These are people who are paying you and never come to the site. Then someone who's a low engaged user, a medium engaged user, and a high engaged user. And as people shift in their buckets, like they move down or move up, you need to put tactics against those to kind of move them back and keep them where they need to be and stable in order to support a price increase.
So, Luke, do you want to just dig in a little bit to the work that you're specifically doing with time on price testing and finding the constraints around that?
Absolutely. And I will actually start it with the data science model flow that we are currently using with time and then with other clients as well. And as Laurie pointed out, the most important thing, whether it's print, digital, or membership, is actually figuring out the customer journey. And from a data science standpoint, the customer journey actually starts with the concept of renewal probability. So as Laurie's pointing out, there are things that we're going to see, whether it's transactional, they renew at a certain time, they're paying a certain amount, whether it's behavioral, they're coming to the site, they're being a zombie. What essentially we're doing is we're rolling all of that into this first model. It has all kinds of names. You could hear it called survival. You could hear it called churn. You can hear it called customer health, lifetime, any type of term to essentially say what this customer is feeling at the time. The way we use this model then is we're trying to identify people who have a certain chance to renew and then actually start bucketing them into high probability of risk, low probability of risk, or just at risk, kind of in the middle. We're not sure what to do with them. From there, and I'll defer to Laurie to talk about the overall strategy, but what we then do is after we learn how the customers are behaving, we will just put them on a path. If they're very solid customers and they have a high probability to renew, that's when we look at price sensitivity models, one of the things Mather is known for. And the second one is if they, for some reason, are in this bucket and are doing some type of cancellation or they fall off for some reason, they expire, a pricing model for Winbacks, getting these people back into the system, not at necessarily the lowest rate that you currently have. If, however, you see these people are the other way, that they're a high risk to churn, we do the churn model, and what we try to do is figure out, is it a pricing issue? Is it the product issue? Is it that this customer just isn't interested in what we're selling? Do we have to, in some way, just let them go? So that's what the churn model is showing. And then ultimately, again, back to print, the question is, how do we save money on these customers? To your point, not only is the magazine expensive, but the mail's expensive. So it's one of those scenarios where, again, what is the optimal amount of speaking to these customers? So we have currently 3 models in place. And Laurie, again, I'll defer to you. But the first model was a print model designed to increase renewal pricing. The second model is the digital version of that model. And the third one is a Winback model that is designed to improve, again, the renewal rate and also the profitability of people you're bringing back into the fold.
Yep. And just to touch on a couple of those points too that Luke made is when we're looking at all of our different models, the dynamic part of it is key, and really being able to not have that one size fits all approach moving forward, especially as we move across, renewals, and then you have your expire group, and then you have your win-back group. When we do that, we kind of really try to keep a holdout group, so you kind of can measure that against what you're overall pushing out, and then you can kind of see the balance of that. In addition, when we are looking at, like, for instance, our print model, like I said, print subscriptions and magazine subscriptions have been low for a period of time. There's a few exceptions, but I always explain that, like, once someone cancels, then we start these direct mail programs or even these digital programs, and they basically go back to like a really low price. And I always say, like, it's like you're playing Monopoly. You pass go, you collect your $200, and then you get sent to jail and you lose your $200. So you work so hard over the years to get these people at a price point that is equal to the value of what you're putting out there. And then all of a sudden they cancel, and cancel could be for bogus reasons, even like their credit card expired and it just didn't make it through. They moved, they canceled by accident. So then you're like, they were paying you X amount of dollars, which is 50% more. And then you go out with these programs that are really low to get them back. So the key is really strategizing, I think, between the moment that they actually look at the pricing and they go to cancel. So have a really effective save the stop strategy in place, whether it's online or in the call center for digital and print. And then once they get into Winback, don't go right back to the drawing board. Keep it still in that, give them some kind of discount, but keep it actually in a healthy place where you're still making revenue and you're not going all the way back to jail, like I just said. And then, one interesting topic there is we actually started testing with time is, in order to get them back, is really talking about the value of what you're providing, but also giving them the choice of what they want to pay, which is a new test that we're actually running, which is really interesting. And we only offer it in one Winback series, one Winback email. And we say, understand the value of what you're getting. And we talk about that and like choose what you want to pay. And we actually give them 3 pricing options. And we find that people do fall in the middle pricing, which is pretty interesting. And then lastly, like I said, don't go all the way back to the drawing board and start pushing out your expires with really low offers. Really try to make them more dynamic based on what their tenure was before, what they were previously paying. Maybe you're giving like certain price points, like above, just say above $30, less of a discount, but still bringing them back with a discount, and then 30 kind of below, keeping them where they are. And then also always have that holdout group, so you really understand how all the pricing that you're doing is measuring up to just staying flat. So
you mentioned dynamic pricing. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Can you show us an example of dynamic pricing in action?
Sure. So as Lori pointed out, we will walk through 3 different versions of dynamic pricing. The first will be a print renewal list. The second will be the digital example of it. And then the third one will be the Winback, again in print, that we will, as it works, we will expand into digital as well. The approach is interesting because, again, a subscriber to a data scientist is a subscriber irrespective of platform. The process essentially stays almost identical every time. So the approach then that we try to accomplish, and I'm going to try to make this a little bigger on screen, is over here, what you're going to look at is the actual results. Lori tasked us to look at one expire group and identify the people within the expire group as the high level, medium level, and low level churn possibilities. And what we did is, by looking at that, we then ended up putting them into different price points. We worked very close with our partners at PWX Solutions in New York to identify these customers and build this out. But what you're going to see here is down below, we have multiple prices going out on one expire group. So you see split 2, the price was actually reduced. The correlation with a price reduction is that these are the people at highest risk. So since this is a specific test for price, what you're seeing is, yes, we're going to try to lower it to see if we can keep them. This will be essentially the control group where there is no price increase. Then you can see in US dollars, a $2 increase along the way. What we're trying to accomplish in any first test is to find what we would call the floor and the ceiling. Because ultimately what you're trying to accomplish is you want to see how far the lifetime value can be increased without actually beginning to turn the line. So the blue line here essentially is going to be the response rate that you can see by group. And you can see that the people that we identified as poor performers are in fact poor performers. So you see the 15.4% response rate. And then you can see based on that control group that Lori mentioned, yeah, we lost money on it. Ultimately, we were going to lose money either way. So the price may not have been the factor to keep them on the file. That's then shared back with Lori and her team to figure out what to do with these people. Right? Because again, ultimately we've identified them. Now we have to figure out a better plan. The better part of the story then, sorry.
Yeah. It does give us the opportunity as we move forward to have that group sliced out and actually start testing now. When we actually start to implement tactics against this prior to the price increase happening, what happens to this group too? We drop like journeys 8 weeks before they start to, before the price increase takes effect, and they start getting those notices that you're going to be increased. And that is something that we're actually doing to kind of fight against that a little bit.
But Laurie, this also supports your hypothesis that the magazine and the magazine media product is undervalued, right? I mean, you look at the response rate and the ability to generate an enormous amount of additional revenue, the green line being the gross revenue gain, for a $10 increase in price, which, had you suggested that without the benefit of the economic data to back it up, would have seen you thrown out of the room for being crazy, actually generates almost the same response as a $4 increase,
Exactly. It just shows you that there's definitely room, and you just need to find that sweet spot and understand, what you're trying to do. And once you go a little higher, it starts to drop. So that's once you go a little higher and it starts to drop, like still higher than the 4, but like, are you willing to take that risk? Because how will it look long term? And you have to think about too, it's not just a one-time increase. What happens in the next year? So you're going to increase them again. So how do these increases play into what's happening in 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years? It is really, you have to build upon it, or else you will probably lose them.
Exactly. And Luke as well, this kind of eliminates the knee-jerk reaction that people have in a time of recession of, oh, well, I must deliver better value, I must reduce my prices. This conclusively shows that that's absolutely the wrong strategy.
Yeah, we're incredibly proud of this test. I'm sorry, Lori.
I was going to say, and I just wanted to comment on, like, when you say build a better value, one thing we try to do at time, and I actually did this at Gannett too, is I really work with my team and the organization to really take every aspect of what the brand puts out there, and even though it's not part of the paying subscription, to make people feel like it is part of their paying subscription. Like, you're notifying them, like, we do a ton at time with Netflix, with Time Studios. We now have a humongous NFT Web3 business, and it's really about educating your users. Even though they're not paying for that information, we make them feel like it's part of their subscription, and we give them the knowledge, and we invite them, and we make them a part of the entire Time brand. And it actually beefs up what you're actually selling and what you're giving them.
So 2 messages to take away from this then. There's a ton of data science that you can apply to price increases, and actually the results may surprise you when you go to the higher end. Can we move on and look at churn, Luke?
Yes.
I know you've got something there on the dynamic pricing example using around churn.
So this is the same principle. We attempted same type of price increase and price modeling on the digital side. So again, the goal of this is using the data, and this is a little more complex because in the print journey, ostensibly what you're looking at is a conversation in the form of renewals, and you're seeing whether or not they made a phone call or what they're willing to pay. Now within digital, it's that transactional information now included with the behaviors of the customers. How are they coming to the site? Are they coming? Are they staying? Where are they going, et cetera? So what you're looking at here, the renewal rates and price sensitivity, essentially, yeah. So we're estimating the price sensitivity of digital subscribers based on subscription characteristics and digital engagement. From there, we're assigning, based on the sensitivity of these customers, with the low sensitivity subscribers receiving the higher price. Results in this instance are remarkable because the green line that you're looking at is the renewal acceptance rate. Again, as price goes up, you're noticing that ultimately the renewal acceptance rates are different, but not by much. So it's one of those scenarios where, at least in this one, we saw no statistical difference in response rates across subscribers receiving an increase between 10 and 100%.
Wow.
This is good.
Yeah.
Right. And that And again, the way the scientist thinks about this is, and I'm going to go back one slide for a second. When you see the red, you've gone too far. That's the ceiling, right? So this test is essentially complete because now we have the range. This test is extraordinary because we thought we pushed it as far as we could. And in reality, we didn't see the decline yet. So this is...
So you're suggesting there could be a rate increase beyond 100%?
Yeah.
It's possible to increase rates beyond 100%.
For certain users.
Yes. Thank you, Lori. That's the key, right?
For
We're still breeding
users.
these users out. And that's the question. Within this universe, are there still people that love this product so that there are other, ways to increase that customer lifetime value? So this is in its early stages, but like I said, we're incredibly pleased with the results of what we're seeing on the digital side.
I mean, I have to say that as somebody who's been standing up for the last 5 years and telling our members that our products are too cheap, this is absolute manna from heaven to see this.
It would be correct. Yes.
I always say that, especially when I got here at time, like the pricing of the magazine business is pretty much, a lot of them are at the same price. I'm going to age myself here, that I was paying or when I would buy a subscription when I was like in high school and grammar school. And that's many years. So like, it's kind of interesting because I can remember being young and paying, $15, $20 for a magazine subscription. And that's kind of where the magazine world sits today still. And it hasn't really moved. Where on the newspaper side of the business, I mean, you could pay up to $350 a year for a local newspaper. And people and still do a price increase on that. So I do think the value is definitely a part of all of this, but I think there's definitely room even at the current state without adding value.
I always encourage people to use the bottle of wine test. Is your subscription each month more or less than the price of a bottle of wine? If it's less than the price of a bottle of wine, well, a bottle of wine, certainly in my house, doesn't last more than one day. And a subscription is designed to last for a month. So you're probably pricing it too cheap. Luke, if we can, let's move on. Let's move on to Winback pricing.
Happily. And before I do, the thing that one of the statements that Lori just made that is germane to the Winback model is not only has price kind of been set in a standard model over a great deal of time, the concept of how you go about attracting customers back to your brand also has a formula to it that's been around and successful, but been around for a long time as well. If you were to think of it strategically, the way it works is if someone falls off the active file and they're no longer a subscriber to your product, you treat them in a way to say, all right, we want them back. And essentially the next part of that sentence is we want them back at any cost. So what you do is you then allow them to go all the way back to the initial offer, the introductory offer. There's a hypothesis that currently exists that when people get to a certain price point, they fall off in order to get that new introductory offer. One of the things that we're trying to help here is say, is it conceivable that instead of dropping all of the customers back to that introductory offer, is there a way to, again, identify them and say, yes, certain people drop to the introductory offer, certain people get a higher price, certain people get a different promotion altogether. And what you're looking at then on the screen here is that win-back process, again, for print, where we, again, look at the estimated price sensitivity of all received these offers, and we broke them into 3 buckets. So again, I'll make it a little bit bigger. So here, what you're looking at is the large price increase, the medium price increase, and the low price increase. Again, what we're saying is there are customers that don't have to drop all the way back down to that lower price in order to keep the numbers off the page. I literally took them off the chart. But what you're going to see is the profitability per sub copy in these groups. The large price increase, again, we push them the hardest and they're making a profit. The medium price increase did the best because we didn't raise price as hard. And then the low price increase obviously did the poorest because these are people that are truly, estranged from the product and they're probably not coming back. What you're looking at on the right then is how we ranked based upon raising the price against the traditional model. So what you're going to look here at, again, taking the price off, one group outperformed Mather's medium price increase on that net profit per sub copy. But then from there, the large price increase finished 4th. The low price, which should finish poorly, finished poorly. But again, we're incredibly excited by this because what we're demonstrating is by identifying even the people who have fallen off the file, you have an opportunity to get them back on the file and increase their lifetime value from the start, rather than sending them all the way to that lowest price.
I kind of look at it with my team internally that there's 4 stages to pricing within the organization. So you have your acquisition price, then you have basically your save the stop price, like what's going to get them to before they leave to capture that moment. Then you have like your win back pricing, right? That's a whole different stage. It's different pricing. And then you have your expire pricing, which is we look at it as like 90 days after the Winback program has ended. So we treat Winback and expire totally different. And then once they don't meet the expire expectations in that 4th range of pricing, then we let them go back and start the process over and maybe bring them in a lot lower. But there's those attempts that happen from the time when they acquire and they cancel, like what happens in between there, depending on what stage they're at. Are they, a save the stop, a win back, or an expire? And treating each one of those different definitely helps build up your revenue, because instead of bringing them from cancel to all the way to the bottom, there's these middle stages in between where you can actually capture a very large amount of people before you go all the way back.
Laurie, I'm going to come back to you in a minute and just ask you about the impact this has had on your thinking. Before I do, everybody, a reminder that you can ask our experts questions using the Q&A panel that you find at the bottom of your screen. Do that, because in a few minutes' time, we're going to take your audience questions. But before we do that, Laurie, I wanted to ask you, in aggregate, this fantastic work that Mather has done, which for me has been really revelatory. What impact is that having on your thinking in aggregate about price for Time's strategy towards price?
Yeah, it definitely gives us, we increased our pricing right from the get-go, which kind of leads into this process. But I definitely think it's about testing and pushing the envelope a little bit and seeing, like, even though we're still evolving and we're still running these prices, we're not stopping. Like, we're still going to look at what happens next. Do these people cancel? You need to see how long it takes a person on a price increase to actually cancel. What is the tenure of those users happen? As I mentioned earlier, what happens in year 2, 3, and 4 with these people? In addition, we do have a decent amount of people on our file that actually pay us monthly, and everybody knows the risk of monthly paying subscribers versus an annual subscriber. But when you have their monthly subscription pricing, they're kind of sitting at that price forever. A lot of people are actually afraid to do an increase on them. So what we're actually looking at now, which I'm excited about, is really understanding a tenured monthly subscriber. So someone who's been on the file for at least a year. We've gotten 12 hits on their credit card, and now let's price increase them. Obviously, it won't be as a drastic change. Like, you're not going to go from, like, just making this up, but like $3.99 a month to $5.99 a month. But like, even those, little quarters, 50 cents, 75 cents increases on a monthly price point, they add up to what you're trying to do in the year. So at the end of the day, if you were to increase someone, 25 cents, that 25 cents times 12 is a significant increase, but people don't really feel it. So that's really where we're actually moving in pricing now, is really trying to look at price points and trying to see what we can do with the monthly group. And then in regards to annual, everybody loves a 2-year subscription, but the 2-year subscription kind of locks people in for a very long period of time. I still love a 2-year subscription because I think it helps balance your overall churn. And when it comes to 2 years, I believe it's a balance. Like, you want to have a percentage of people that are on 2-year, and then what do you do with them after 2 year? But I don't think it's like go all in on 2-year subscriptions unless you are really high priced, but you can bring them in low on 2 years and then adjust them in year 3. But I do think it's a balance. Like, you don't want 50% of your people on a 2-year subscription. I do think I have it there as a side to kind of help mitigate the overall churn while you're doing all of this testing. And it's a good balance between revenue and actually your subscription numbers.
Luke, there'll be a bunch of people watching this who are going, this is amazing, but how on earth do you do it? What's the kind of basis behind this? How do you build these models? And what's the data that you're using to generate this work?
So I'll do it in 2 components. The first part is the data set itself comes usually in 2 forms. The CMS, the customer marketing system, is providing transactional information. So ultimately, like I said, the original part to the model is, how do we go about looking at how they're interacting with you from a financial standpoint? Are they renewing consistently? Are they renewing for longer terms, as Lori just pointed out. All of those variables kind of give an insight into how they're going to relate transactionally to you. The second part, and the part that's most exciting, is the digital side is an enormous amount of data on the customer and how they're interacting literally with the product. And that's where you can start getting into a more robust and almost near real-time relationship with that customer to see exactly how they're reacting to the product that's out there. So with that being the case, we look at both sets of data. And then from there, I wanted to bring this up and give this to the audience as well. As a data scientist, I have a different approach than the economists. So I've now been working at Mather for just under a year. And in doing so, we've begun to discuss how data should enter into a model. And it's an important conversation. So I'm going to switch pages here for a second. And this does get a little into the weeds, so I'll go very quickly. But what's important to remember is, once again, with expense, we talked earlier about expense on paper for magazines and mail. One of the biggest expense most media companies are incurring is data. And it's because there is literally so much coming, and they're using cloud-based tools that, as a data scientist, I love it. I want every bit of information I can possibly get my hands on. But the econometrician approach, I must say, is a very compelling way to build these models. So what essentially you're looking at here on the left-hand side is, we at Mather, essentially for any price model or for any churn model, we have a pretty good idea which variables are going to move the needle the most. So the process on the left then essentially is what's called a forward approach. Down here, what you're looking at is all of these little bubbles are all of the variables that we possibly could could get our hands on. There are literally thousands of data points. That's a lot. And the problem is, to analyze each one is very expensive. I'll show you the data science way in a second. But ultimately, the way that the econometrician goes about it is, they want to start with what they believe is the most important variable, and then to the second most important variable, and to the third, up until they get to what we're calling the accuracy threshold. The goal of it is to use as little data as possible. The word parsimonious actually means cheap. And that is exactly what it is. How can I get to the right answer using as little information as humanly possible? For those of you in the audience that have data scientists and have data lakes, the data science approach is called the profuse model, meaning a lot. What they're ending up doing is they are using every conceivable variable they can get their hands on, and they're extracting them one at a time. So if you think about it, the computer is turned on and is computing and saying, this one's not useful, this one's not useful. And that is an incredibly expensive way to go. Ultimately, they're going to end up at the same point. But what we're doing at Mather, and what I appreciate more and more, is the idea of actually starting with the experts, actually explaining to you, we've done this a lot, we have best practices, use these, let's see how it looks, and if necessary, we can always expand.
And the accuracy, I guess, is determined by testing the model against what happens in the real world.
Yes, there are phrases like confusion matrix. So true positive, true negative, true positive, true negative, false negative. Ostensibly, what we're doing is we're actually looking at the results in a test data set before we ever put the model out. So that, yes, the accuracy is defined as something as, we've identified the models, we've identified the weight of each of those variables, meaning how much importance they have. And then ultimately, we test it before we ever send it out to say, yes, this is a model that should perform very well. So when you see the results on the other page, one of our data scientists, Luke Boutwell, who works closely with Time, essentially smiles, saying he's feeling very confident that the results on those pages are going to happen, because that's the legwork you do beforehand. Yeah,
you're able to predict them with a high degree of confidence.
Yes.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute and ask you both about the relationship between publishers and data science, because it's been something we've been debating for a number of years. Before I do that, though, we have a question from the audience, which I'll take now. If you have any other questions, audience members, now is the time to put them in, because we're almost out of time. This is from my old friend, Mr. Anonymous Attendee, who says, based on which criteria do you choose the customers for the different price groups, or how do you identify customers for those different test groups? Laurie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we identify them, like Luke said, based on when they're up for renewal. That's the first thing that we look at, who's up for renewal. Also, you know, how engaged they are, what they're doing, what's their current tenure, where they live, what's the price point that they're currently on, and, you know, all those factors. But we are price increasing basically anyone that comes up for renewal or not, depending on what bucket they fall into. They could be that we do have a bucket that, as Luke showed you guys, that are not likely to take a price increase. So really trying to like balance all of those factors. So we're going in strong, and obviously we didn't start that way, but we started with small buckets and testing and stuff, but everyone is in line and basically in the model to get a price increase or not. So they're either being measured against as the control, or they are getting a price increase on a continuous basis.
Right. And if you were to think about it intuitively, we're using the variables that most consumer marketers are already aware of. So there's something called a source mix. So how are they actually taking the offer? When are they paying matters, right? Because if you think about it, if someone gets either on a print side, gets their bill and pays immediately, or actually extends out a digital offer for the entire year, that they're telling you something in that activity. So the difference between, the fancy word is heuristics, the rules of thumb that the marketers have versus the data scientist, is essentially the data science is quantifying that rule of thumb. So the person who is, renewing immediately has a certain value that we can put to them. And that's how ostensibly we're deciding who falls into which of those buckets. Ironically, the churn model and the pricing model are in many ways very similar. One is just telling you the probability that they're going to stay with you, and the price is essentially saying what they're willing to pay. But ultimately, the variables to make those decisions are fairly similar.
Fantastic. Okay, well, listen, we're nearly out of time, folks, but before we go, I wanted to just close by asking you about this relationship between publishers and data science. Laurie, what would be your advice for the best way to manage the relationship between a publisher and a data science team or a data science business?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a goal to kind of work together to get to the best point. I think the data scientists are definitely providing the right information to help a marketer make decisions. But I do believe, as Luke said, like, you can have too much information. And I do find like a lot of people do reach for a lot of information, but then your buckets just get smaller, smaller, smaller. And then it's like harder to test. So I think it's about trusting who you're working with on your data science team, or like this with Mather, really understanding the major points that are actually going to actually make a difference. It's kind of like in the world of testing, like, do you go with changing the whole landing page, or do you change the color of the button? So it's kind of like, is the juice worth the squeeze in certain data, is how I would like to say it. Like, make sure the data you're pulling is valuable and it's not just kind of some noise on the side or a distraction that's actually just minimizing the buckets that you're trying to test. So I think really trusting that, and trusting the impact of how that data feeds into other areas of the site and other things that you're doing is important as well, because then it all kind of works together across your engagement tools, your new marketing initiatives, your pricing. So I think it just needs to be a cohesive environment for the way you use your data and stuff too.
Luke, from your point of view, what would your advice be?
I agree with Laurie, and I will add a couple points. The data science team will always look for the perfect answer. The most important part of the subject matter relationship, the subject matter expert relationship in this, is to kind of put guardrails on the data scientist. We need to understand what we're trying to accomplish, and we need to understand the fastest way to get there. Those rules come from the subject matter experts. And also, when a model is produced, sometimes it's wrong. And by wrong, I mean it's identifying things that are not the appropriate signal. The only way the data scientist is going to know that is through the subject matter experts saying, this doesn't make any sense. So it's a relationship between the two groups, and that expertise, when it marries, is actually quite powerful. And I can only say that I'm proud to work with the Time team, because they're incredibly helpful in helping us stay on track and build the best models possible.
And just to add to one thing you said, Luke, because I love what you said, and I think it's important across the organization, but I think the knowledge of the data scientists and making them understand like what you're trying to do, what you're trying to get to, and how you're going to get there, as well as the follow-up results, only will make you progress in a more positive way. So like if they know like this isn't working, I have found that they can come back and kind of work with you and make them, it's part of them. They're helping this happen too. I always say, like, in an organization, gone are the days where marketing did their thing, edit did their thing, product did their thing. Like, nothing really can happen these days without the organization coming together and having a clear understanding of what the goal is and what direction are we going in? So.
Fantastic. It's a great place to leave it. Publishers and data scientists working in partnership. And as we've seen in some of the case studies that you've shown today, the results can be both amazing and fantastic. Luke and Laurie, thank you very much for your time today in showing us the fantastic results that you've had from working together. Luke, just remind everybody how they can learn more about Mather Economics. Where can they go to get a bit more information?
They can go to the website at, sorry, James, I had that written down and then I changed the screen. They can go to Mather, M-A-T-H-E-R, economics, economics.com.
There you go, perfect. And you can learn more about the great work that Mather does, not only with Time, but with a whole bunch of other organizations in our industry as well. If you want to learn more about FIP, you can go to FIP.com. And if you want to meet us and potentially some folks from Mather and maybe even from Time as well in person, then we will be at the FIP Insider event in New York on December the 1st at the Hearst Tower. It's free to attend. You can sign up on FIP.com. And of course, if you want to review any of the fantastic lessons that you've had from today's webinar, you can do so again on our YouTube channel. The video will be posted there in a few days' time. We're out of time. It only remains for me to thank all of you for coming today and listening to this webinar. Thank you again to our guests, Laurie and to Luke, and we will see you very soon at the next FIP webinar. Thank you very much.